But anyway, I'm going to talk about Eurasian water milfoil, which I seem to do quite a bit. Just to give you some background, I started doing research on Eurasian water milfoil in the last century. And I've done work on Eurasian water milfoil in terms of experimental survey and management research at multiple scales throughout my career. I'm basically trying to condense 40 years of study into 20 minutes. So we'll see how that happens. Before we get too far into it, I want to reiterate that there are benefits to aquatic plants, and you'll see some of those listed. I have to go faster because I got to get 40 slides into 20 minutes too. So native aquatic plants are good. Invasive aquatic plants typically are bad. That's the end of that story. Now, so on Eurasian water milfoil, I'm going to talk about identification and description, and I want some of you out there to take notes here because you should be able to identify the milfoils. I realize I've been doing this for 40 years, but anyway, talk a little bit about habitat, ecological range, propagation, all those things. These are all things you need to understand to appropriately manage Eurasian water milfoil in a given lake or in lakes across a region. Eurasian water milfoil is still named Milfoil spiccatum ever since Carl Linnaeus named it that back in the, even before I started on it. It's in the wholly aquatic family, Haloragaceae. When I say wholly, I mean WHOLLY, just in case you're confused. It can form very dense surface canopies like that picture on the lower left side. It is an herbaceous evergreen perennial. That means there are green shoots all year long. And every year for the last 40, I've heard people say, well, it's growing under the ice. I can see it. Or it's growing in the middle. It's right down there. No, it's not growing. It's just there are green shoots all year long. And it has a multiple modes of spread, the most important of which are fragments. It is originally from Central Europe, and it's non-native to the U.S. Y'all with me so far? Let's go on to identification. Eurasian water milfoil can be identified by a few simple characteristics. I'm going to, for this purpose, pretend that there are no hybrids, okay? Because hybrid characteristics are integrated, meaning some will look more like one parent or the other or be intermediate. So keep that in mind. There are two genera in the Haloragaceae family, Milfoil and Proserpinaca. We're focusing on Milfoil. There are 14 Milfoil species in the U.S. 12 of those are native. 2 are invasive. You know, I did pass math. But yes, there are hybrids, and I'm not going to go there because Ryan and Morella are going to cover that in a moment. These are all these Milfoil species in North America. And I do have an identification guide based on a presentation I gave a number of years ago. If you want to contact me about that, I can send it on to you. These are the native Milfoil in species in the western U.S. You have western water milfoil, Milfoil hyperoides. You have Andean water milfoil, Milfoil quitense. You have northern water milfoil, Milfoil sibiricum, and world water milfoil, Milfoil verticillatum. By far the most common native in the western U.S. Is northern water milfoil. Northern water milfoil and Eurasian water milfoil are confused, and it's easy to get them confused. In fact, taxonomists, in their continuing quest to keep us all confused and make it more difficult to identify things, for a long time referred to Northern water milfoil and Eurasian water milfoil as two varieties of the same species. But fortunately, that was a long time ago. Okay, so Northern water milfoil, please note that the leaves have less than 12 leaflet pairs. And I think you can see my little pointer here. Anybody want to say yes or no, or wouldn't? Okay, this is a leaflet. That's a leaflet. There's a leaflet. The little green tubes are leaflets. So you count the number of leaflets on one side of a leaf, and Northern water milfoil will have less than 12. And it typically is around 8 or so. And also, the leaf tips are either round or pointed. See how they're rounded or pointed? Likewise, the apical meristem region right here, see how it's rounded or domed? Okay, that's also a characteristic. Okay, you all follow me so far? Eurasian water milfoil. It has more than 12, many more than 12 leaflets. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I just counted up my available hand there. Okay, but there are a lot more than 12. The leaf ends are flat. You see how flat that leaf end is? And the apical meristem region, that growing tip, is flat, not rounded. Okay, so you can tell them apart. There is some variation, but you can identify these. Okay, distribution. Do you want to talk more about identification? Send me an email. This is an old map. Eurasian water milfoil is in every state in the continental United States. There's some debate about Alaska and Hawaii. It's probably there too. Eurasian water milfoil is found in every continent in the world except Antarctica. So it's all over the place. Habitat. This is a truly amazing plant in terms of all the different places it can grow. It can grow in fairly turbid water. It can grow in very clear water. It can grow in low alkalinity water. It can grow in high alkalinity water. It can grow in modestly saline water. Basically, if it's wet, it can grow. The one thing, though, is that it must be permanently wet year-round. So for Eurasian water milfoil to thrive, you have to have a permanently wet body of water. If it's drawn down completely, it won't survive from one season to the next. So that's the critical thing. And I basically repeated myself. Okay, let me flip back to this. This is the Fall River in California. This is an oligotrophic trout stream. This is Mobile Bay, which is a moderately saline marine estuary. This is, I think, Lake Hortonia in Vermont. A lot of milfoil. That's somewhere else, I think. That's also somewhere else, I think, and that's a bay on Lake Minnetonka in Minnesota. Okay, it's all over the place. Let's move on. Ecological range. There's lots of factors that are discussed about what can limit aquatic plants or limit plants. I'll go into this in more detail. Again, the most important thing is it must be permanently inundated. If we think about the environmental range of a species, if we look at an environmental gradient, there will be a low point beneath which it cannot survive, a high point above which it cannot survive, and some optimum, usually somewhere in the middle. Okay, I'm sure you're all following me so far. this ecological science is very, very technical, right? Okay. The first thing, light. Light is very important for plants. People think like plant food is nitrogen fertilizer. No, plant food is light. That's it. Okay. And so plants will typically not grow in low transparency water. This is 0.4 meters. That's like 1.5 feet. And it doesn't, it can tolerate very high light levels, but usually depth is limited by something else at this end. But the main thing is that it'll grow out as deep as light can penetrate. Bicarbonate. Now this is where we get into the metaphorical weeds here. Plants need light, they need carbon. If you're living in the atmosphere, you can get it from carbon dioxide in the air. If you're in water, you have to take up dissolved carbon dioxide from the water. But a small subset of aquatic plants have learned a neat trick where they can take inorganic carbon from bicarbonate. So that's what this is here. Bicarbonate enters the cell and it pumps out hydroxyl ions. Hydroxyl makes the water pH higher. So the plants have a pump that's increasing the pH of the water around it as it takes up dissolved inorganic carbon. Eurasian water milfoil, you guessed it, is one of those plants that can do that. Now, my major professor at Wisconsin back in the last century wrote this paper originally on stone, stone tablet, but he parlayed this idea that plants can use inorganic carbon in the form of bicarbonate into a research proposal to NSF so he could fly to Italy for the summer and drink their local wine and enjoy himself and do a study he could have done in Wisconsin at his home quite easily. And sure enough, as the dissolved inorganic carbon or the alkalinity increases, the milfoil photosynthesizes faster and faster, and it also grows more quickly. Now, I'm going to take a wild guess that Bear Lake is down here at this end, not up at this end. So what does that say for your lake? Well, since it's probably cold water and it's low alkalinity water, it grows slowly, but it still can grow and thrive just fine. Smith and Barco, in their review paper back in 1990, threw out the idea that milfoil does best in eutrophic waters and does not do anywhere near as well as oligotrophic waters. And that I hear this repeated all the time. However, sometimes data comes crashing, or a generalization comes crashing into actual data and breaks up. And so here, this is some literature data on a paper I wrote a while back, and total phosphorus, which is one of the indicators in the trophic level of a lake. Milfoil grows quite well at a rather modest level of total phosphorus in the water. This is in part because the plants are taking up phosphorus from the sediment, not the water. Here's the trophic index, which is a scale of, this is oligotrophic down here, this is eutrophic up here, and these are mesotrophic lakes, and milfoil does just fine even into lakes that are somewhat oligotrophic. So the plants, milfoil doesn't really care about the trophic status per se. Milfoil does well in low alkalinity, and it does well in high alkalinity. So that there again, it has a very broad habitat range. It does well in partially salty water, in saline marine estuaries. It does just fine. In fact, in the southeastern part of the U.S., this is the habitat where you find Eurasian water milfoil remaining after the invasion of hydrilla. This is a study done by Nichols and Buchan back in the 90s using Wisconsin Lakes database and the occurrence of milfoil and a few other species. And he found that the range of depth is very broad from milfoil. The range of pH is broad, though I'll make a caveat there that the plants aquatic plants don't care particularly about what the pH is per se, since pH is an aquatic plant's plaything. Total alkalinity, broad range. Conductivity, very broad range. So basically, Eurasian water milfoil grows in a very broad range of habitats, a very broad ecological range. Propagation and spread. Okay, you're trying to contain this plant and manage it. How is it getting around? When is it getting around? I'll get into that just a little bit. Eurasian water milfoil makes seeds, and it also has vegetative propagation. So and I don't need that slide. Okay, propagation by seed. Eurasian water milfoil does produce seeds. This is the inflorescence right here. This is the pollen producing flowers. These are the ovule producing flowers down here. It'll form seeds. They look like little nutlets. I just about lost my eyesight in the 80s trying to cut these in half and see if they were viable. That was a project I was glad to move off of. The seeds are highly viable. They will germinate underwater, but seedlings typically don't survive. And from what I've seen, seed propagation is not important in the survival of milfoil from one year to the next, but propagation from seed must occur because we have hybrids, and hybrids can only be formed by sexual propagation. So that leaves us vegetative spread. This is the way milfoil gets around, and it can spread by what I call allofragments, fragments that break off from wave action or boat action, from autofragments, which is a process that plants generate their own fragments, and by runners, where a stem will tip over and reroot in the ground. That's what that's supposed to be. It doesn't really have a rhizome. It has a stem base that slowly increases in girth. Vegetative propagation by fragments. This is very important. You can fill a lake in a single season if there's enough fragments produced. The fragments typically form during the summer, early fall, but those fragments, since they're high, the autofragments are high in starch. The autofragments are made by the formation of an abscission zone on the stem, and the fragment that results is high in starch, much higher than the non-fragment stem or than allofragments. This is studied in Lake George, again, the last century, but you'll see that we have a strong peak of autofragment formation in the early fall. The biomass grows to its peak biomass. A significant amount of the biomass is converted into autofragments, and then the biomass decreases. Those autofragments have starch. They survive over the winter. They settle and form new colonies. Those fragments are carried by wind action, by wave action, by wind-generated currents along the shoreline, and by animal carriers, and certainly if there's water movement down a river into an adjacent lake, they're spread easily by that. But the other thing, and this is exclamation point right here, boats. This license plate is a U.S. government plate. This is actually Tennessee Valley. And you can see it's just festooned with Eurasian water milfoil. So we have met the enemy, and it's the U.S. government, because they're spreading it all over the place on their boat trailers. But any other boaters can spread it on their boat trailers. So that's why the boat inspection stations and the public education is so important to prevent the spread of this and other species. Phenology and growth. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this. Again, Eurasian water milfoil is an evergreen perennial. The growth between years in a given lake can vary substantially, whether you have a warm, clear year where the season might start earlier than average, versus a cool, cloudy year where the season starts a little bit later. That can have a huge impact on how much milfoil you grow. But if you go across its range between lakes, you can see a huge range in when the milfoil peaks and how many peaks you have. This is Lake George, a single dominant peak that goes in the late summer, early fall. This is Lake Wingra in Wisconsin, 2 peaks. And this dip here is slight senescence when the milfoil forms autofragments after this peak, and those fragments spread around the lake. This is some ponds we studied in Texas, and we had 2 very distinct peaks, one in the spring and one in the fall. And this big dip here is because the water temperatures got so warm that the plants did not grow well. We actually can see this in lakes and reservoirs of the South. Eurasian water milfoil forms lots of nuisance problems. You can get this report here. And again, if you email me, I can send you a PDF of that as well. This was made with support by the Aquatic Plant Management Society, by the Council for Agricultural Science and Technology. There are human impacts, navigation, hydropower, and so on. And there are ecological effects, degradation of water quality, impacting fish populations, native plant species, and all things like that. So that is my 40 years in slightly more than 20 minutes. Feel free to send me email questions, or I'll hang around for the discussion later.